Welcome to Act 3, the podcast where we explore how to thoughtfully shape the rest of our lives. I'm your host, Cara Gray. This podcast is sponsored by Good Morning Freedom, my third act consultancy, where I help executives and professionals with a plan to intentionally design the rest of their lives. For more information, stay tuned until the end. Today, I welcome Kristen Cavallo to the podcast. Kristen never thought she'd be a CEO. She wanted to be that cool, swashbuckling mama taking her kids on international escapades. Luckily, she got to do both. As global CEO of MullenLowe Group and the Martin Agency, she worked with teams across the world to create impactful ideas that were memorable and effective. And she visited all 7 continents with her kids. Kristen is a globally respected leader in the world of branding and advertising. A dynamic speaker, she is known for taking on important social and business issues, serving as champion for equity and inclusion, and defending the integrity of original creative ideas. Under Kristen's leadership, the Martin Agency grew 50% in 5 years, was recognized as Adweek's U.S. Agency of the Year in 21 and 22, and Ad Agency's Agency of the Year in 23. Martin also made the coveted Fast Company Most Innovative Companies list in 23 and 24. Her team was recognized for exceptional leadership across multiple disciplines, including creative, PR, new business, talent, and culture, and she was named Virginia Business Person of the Year. She simultaneously held the global position of Global CEO of MullenLowe, where she spearheaded an agency rebrand that united a 55-office global network. In addition to building employee morale, the work was heavily awarded, including 3 Cannes Lions in 2024, including a gold for Best Rebrand Refresh of an Agency. During her tenure as global CEO, 6 MullenLowe agencies won Agency of their Year in their respective international markets. After 30 years as strategist and C-suite leader, she retired from the ad industry and moved into the nonprofit world as executive director of the Branch Museum of Design. Kristen, it's such an honor to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Sure. So today we are going to look forward as opposed to looking backwards, which I do on many of these podcast interviews. If you want to hear about Kristen and her years in advertising and all of her thoughts on that, believe me, you can Google her and you will find a multitude of interviews in both print and podcasts. But now we're going to talk about moving forward. But as a consultant who helps my clients with that transition from the main career to what's next, I do want to talk about that transition a bit, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So your first moves after leaving advertising, like after 3 decades in the agency world, what were your first actions that you took when you stepped away? And like what experiments sort of helped you figure out what was going to be next?
Well, let me step back a little bit. I probably was ready to retire 2 to 3 years before I did. And, but I'm a single mother and pragmatic, grew up in a military family. And so I was reluctant just to jump without knowing what the net would be. I didn't feel like that was the most responsible thing to do. Still young enough that I felt like I probably should work. I could work. I knew that I was capable of working. But I also felt like I was ready for something else. So I probably took about 2 years to think about what that next experiment would be. And I tackled it. I was a strategist in advertising. And for those who don't know, basically a strategist, when I started back in 94, would mean understanding the consumer, the target audience, interviewing them, whether in one-on-one interviews or focus groups, determining the white space competitively, figuring out the exact positioning of how you wanted to market the product or the brand. But a lot of research, and my master's was in stats. And so I love the whole research process. And so I thought, well, I'm going to use the tools of my trade and actually apply it towards myself and my next chapter. So I went on to LinkedIn, which is one of my favorite social media apps. I'm less on it now than I was then, but I was on it a lot then, and looked through some profiles of some people I knew, but some people I didn't know. Maybe I was, connected, within 6 degrees. And I was looking for people who had made interesting career moves, not something that felt linear like a ladder, but maybe they had done something lateral or they'd done something just really thought-provoking and interesting. And I reached out to about 30 or 40 of these folks over the 2 years and just reached out via LinkedIn and said, I'm contemplating my next chapter, and I would love to hop on the phone. And I have 3 questions to ask you. What questions did you ask yourself before you made your jump? What do you wish you'd asked yourself? And how did it turn out? And I thought if I just listened to them tell their story, then I could write notes down. I keep them all on my phone. I have like 450 notes of things. But I thought I'll write down the things that I found personally relevant. And if I didn't find anything really relevant, then it was a 30-minute conversation where I just got to listen to somebody, and how great is that, And,
Yeah.
But I would tell you almost always there was a nugget or an insight that I wrote down, and I thought, well, that's interesting. And I kind of accumulated all these insights into a notes on my phone, which helped me frame and reframe what I thought I was going to do next. It actually changed what I thought I would do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you want to share what you thought you were going to do?
Yeah, I thought I was going to go into politics.
Okay.
Or I thought I would go maybe work client side, but for a founder-led brand. Because I found that the most fun I had was when the brand or the marketers that I was working with had a strong narrative. They knew what role their brand played in a category, or what role their brand could play in a category. And a lot of revolution comes from the sidelines, comes from the challenger brands. Often those are founder-led. So I thought that's maybe what I'm going to do. And I talked to a number of people who had gone to founder-led companies and said, you need to know that in many ways they are irrational. You might join and think you're going to IPO, or think something's, there's going to be this moment in time, and all your hard work's going to pay off if you're doing it for that reason. And that might get postponed over and over because the founder may not want to relinquish control. And there is a degree when you're planning your life, and as a single parent planning your life, you kind of, at least I do, I shouldn't say anyone else, but I would be like, well, if I'm doing things for certain reasons, I would need to make plans for those reasons. It may not be financial. It just might be like the length of time I want to spend, or some achievement I want to realize, or if I'm going to take a pay cut, is there a sense of a window at the other end where that's going to feel worth it? And knowing that the founder might be highly irrational, should factor in as a variable in my consideration set. Again, being a stats person,
Yeah.
variables matter. So there were moments like that where I thought, well, maybe I don't want to go work for a founder-led company, or maybe I want to work for a founder-led company that has a board. But then I also talked to people who'd gone into politics, and I found that while I love politics, which I know sounds crazy, I don't love what's happening right now in politics, but I love the idea of civil work and government and things like that. I don't necessarily love, manipulation or fundraising, like what feels like where we are. But
Yeah.
The closer I got to that, the more I started to realize it was not as, it wasn't as much about governing as I would have hoped. And so I started to think, well, maybe I don't want to do that either. So in some ways, all those interviews, in some ways, people became surrogates for mistakes that I did not want to make, which was interesting. And I thought of there's other ways I can serve. There's other ways I can be a servant. There's other ways I can contribute without necessarily dedicating, the next decade of my life to that as a vocation. So I think that interview process helped me hone a little bit maybe what I didn't want to do. maybe more so
Yeah.
what I did want to do. But then I was talking to a friend, Sarah, who I worked with at Mullen, and a number of people, because I felt so fortunate, Cara. I loved my career. I loved it with all its ups and downs, with all its crazy, with all the things. There were hard days, and there were also amazing days. For the most part, I felt mostly throughout my career, but especially as I was drawing to a close, I thought, oh my gosh, I am so lucky. I got paid to think creatively, and I got paid to work with people who traveled and read and went to art galleries and went to film festivals and absorbed culture and absorbed life and watched people in airports. And I got to learn a little bit about a lot of things. Like I could go from talking about Kohler plumbing to NASCAR to Oreo cookies to supply chain logistics to car insurance. And I thought, I didn't know a lot. I couldn't go deep on these things, but I could go broadly. And I thought, how lucky am I that I got to work across so many industries? I was never bored. I mean, I was frustrated. There were times things were unfair. There were times where things felt really insurmountable. But I was never bored for 30 years. And I thought, how many people can say that? I mean, that's a crazy gift. And so when I was nearing retirement, a number of people would say to me, oh, you're not going to be able to retire. Like, you don't have it in you. And I was like, I'm kind of tired. I think I've got insomnia. I definitely think I can retire. But I decided, I went to Google, and I had read somewhere in my planning years that it takes 2 weeks to break a habit. And so I thought, what if advertising was my habit? Not only was it my friend group, it was my interest, it was my hobby, it was my vocation, and I was good at it. And so that helped fuel it even more. But I thought, okay, if I have to break this habit, because I don't want to be like the ghost of Christmas past and keep reading all the trades and keep following everybody on LinkedIn and pine over what was. I really wanted to move forward, like the whole point of your podcast, and recognize that I had achieved almost everything I'd wanted to achieve, and I loved it, but now I was ready to apply skills to something else. And so I Googled what takes longer than 2 weeks, because I thought I need to break this habit. And one of the things that popped up was walking the Camino.
That was going to be my next question. So thank you.
So it is, for those who don't know, it's a pilgrimage to a certain city where one of the disciples' bones are supposedly buried in Spain. And there's 7 different routes, one through Portugal and all the rest through Spain, to get to the city. And the routes vary in difficulty and the number of people that are on them and the amount of infrastructure they have. I'm not Catholic, but I am spiritual. And I thought, I'm not super athletic, but I thought I can put my right foot in front of my left. And so I put everything in a backpack and went solo. And I had a friend that came with me for the first week and another friend that met me for the last week. And then the weeks in between, I was solo and just carried my stuff in the backpack and went 400 miles. And it took me 22 days of walking. And then I added some extra days. Like when I was in Bilbao, I'd never been to the Guggenheim. And so I added some days in between. I would stop in cities that I'd never been to, Leon, Spain, or Bilbao, and spend an extra day and, go visit some cathedrals and some museums and things like that. And the thought was, I'll just quiet my mind. And my friend Sarah had told me, she's like, I'm so jealous because she's like, this business does not allow for a quiet mind. And she's like, I'm so jealous. And I really pondered over that thought for a while. And I came to this kind of realization that while I've had moments of silence or calmness, I have never had a quiet mind. And I chose an industry that not only didn't allow for it, but I actually think I leaned into the fact that I love to multitask. And being a military brat, I moved every 3 years. And so I felt like I'd found an industry that allowed me to relish my desire for change all the time. And I don't know if it was subconscious or serendipity, but I had found a vocation that allowed me to kind of live life the way I had grown up living life, which was learning and moving and growing and never static. And advertising is something you never turn off. So even if I would go to a national park or if I was off the grid, you would see a billboard or you would see, a t-shirt, you would see merch. I mean, it's everywhere. And so I never turned it off. And I mostly almost always found it inspiring. I would collect ideas and come back and bring them to work. But I really, when Sarah said, oh my gosh, you're going to have a quiet mind, I thought, oh my God, I don't know what that feels like. And is that a scary thought?
Yeah.
What
Was it uncomfortable? Was it quiet? Did it get
I loved
quiet?
it. I got to tell you, I took to retirement like a pig in mud. It was like the best 9 months of my life. In fact, since coming back to work, for 6 months, for like the first 3, I cried off and on, like, why did I do this? But I loved that walk. And so I had gone to the DNC the night before I left for the Camino. And I'd been super frustrated. I'm a Democrat. I was super frustrated with the Democratic Party right before that. I had gone. It was a very moving, inspiring experience. I'd never been to a convention before, just watching democracy unfold, watching someone, be kind of knighted to take a party forward. Was itself, I'd never seen anything like that. So that was, enlightening and inspiring and fun. And you're with all these people that don't look anything like you and everyone's rallying and it was wonderful. But then the next day I packed my backpack and went walking. And I'll tell you, within 10 days, I knew I do not want to go into politics for a living. I don't know what it was, but I just knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that I don't mind participating in politics, but I did not want to work in politics. So then I was like, well, my gosh, what do I want to do? And one day it was particularly rainy and I was walking alone. I'd started on a different, or the northern route. It's called Camino del Norte. And partly because it was the least populated, only 6% of pilgrims take this path. But also it had a number of cities I'd never visited before. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And it turned out that I need to see some people. As much as I can say that I'm a little introverted. I turn on for work and I turn off when I get home, and I really love my alone time. I can huddle up for a weekend and not talk to anybody, or even a week longer. It's kind of the well I go back to replenish. I did find that 2 weeks of not seeing people was actually kind of unnerving. Even if I don't have to talk to them, just seeing somebody in the horizon or in the distance. And there were very few people on this path. I think it was the time of year and maybe the rain. And I slipped and fell. Got up, wasn't hurt or anything, but all of a sudden this woman popped up out of nowhere. She's Romanian, and we walked the next 5 hours together. And she had done maybe like 4 Caminos. And so she asked me, she's like, well, why are you walking? What did you ask for? What did you ask God or the universe for before you started? And I said, oh my God, I didn't ask for anything. Like, I'm really just here to receive. I didn't
do that part.
Oh my God. And I thought, I had this horrible feeling where I was like, do I have to go back to Go, like Monopoly, and start over to collect $200? And like, shit, this whole thing, like, I started wrong and none of it counts. And she says, not too late. She's like, in my experience, when you walk the Camino, you'll get an answer to your question by the end of the Camino or within 3 weeks of returning home. And I thought, well, that's oddly specific. 3 weeks. I mean, Anyway, the next 2 weeks, I had come to this idea that I thought, actually, I want to, there was this really great New York Times article years and years ago where it was like 34 questions you could ask someone else. And if you kept eye contact with that person while you answered 34 questions, the mathematical probability of falling in love was very high. And I know that as a strategist, that was quite fascinating. And so I started thinking about, I wonder if I love art, I love design. So I thought, I wonder if I could use my planning skills to find a questionnaire like the New York Times, and I could meet with clients once a year, almost like your financial advisor would, and ask this list of questions. And then I would find art or artists that matched some story that they'd had that year, and then bring them art that they could acquire. I would get a percentage of the value, but then their home would be filled with art that reflected the stories or epiphanies of their life. And I thought this would be such a fun idea. And I love being around art. I love being around artists, I love being around creatives. I find them, for the most part, very optimistic people, which I know sounds a little, I mean, I know Van Gogh chopped off an ear. There's a lot of depression and anxiety in creative people as well. But for the most part, I found advertising an optimistic industry. You know, no one ever gives you a brief or an assignment to tank a brand or make it less valuable. It's always based on increasing people's appreciation for something. And so, but I would hear people's stories. And let's say you had this amazing epiphany. And I had talked to this one woman who had this amazing epiphany on this trip. And she actually, when I was talking to her, I asked her how she described herself, and she was Brazilian. And she said, I'm a survivor. And I thought she meant cancer or something, but it wasn't that. It was just that her life had had a series of hardships. And she said at the end of our time together, she said, you know, I think sometimes my life was meant to be hard. And because of that, I have become a survivor. I've put on the armor of survivorship. I ended up seeing her like 5 days later on a different whole part of the walk. And I went up to her and I said, you know, I started wondering about cause and effect. And I wondered, are you a survivor because you feel like your life was meant to be hard? Or are you holding on to this idea that your life is meant to be hard in order to be a survivor? And what if you let go of that? Would some of this weight of the armor lift off your shoulders? And she was like, oh my gosh, that's really thoughtful. I saw her again like 10 days later, and she's like, I can't stop thinking about that. So that's the fun thing about the Camino. But I thought in between, oh my gosh, I'd love to find something that represented that insight so that she could have it in her home. And every day when she walked past it, she might say, don't give in to this arbitrary fight that your life is meant to be hard, because then you'll look for reasons to armor up, which can be heavy. And what if your life, life can be lighter? And what if you didn't subscribe to that narrative? And I kept thinking I would love to find a piece. And so I thought, okay, this is what I do. I'm going to go home. I'm going to write this questionnaire, like the New York Times, reply it to this. I'm going to get a part-time job in a museum for healthcare. And then I'm going to try to go back to school. We have the #1 public art school in the city I live in Richmond, Virginia. So I thought I'm going to go back to school and get like a master's of fine art so that I have some kind of credentials for this. And I was like, this is my plan. And it was something that had literally never occurred to me before I went walking. I mean, I never spoke to a person who worked in a museum. I never spoke to an art curator, in all my 2 years of interviewing people and kind of preparing for my next chapter. It was absolutely nowhere on my radar. And I came home and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm going to do. And I only told maybe 2 people. And 3 weeks after I got home, somebody reached out to me who I've never had coffee with ever in my life, but we know we're connected through people. And we met at a coffee shop and had coffee. And he said, we have a new design museum in town, and we were wondering if you wanted to lead it. And I thought, again, like the mathematical probability of this is so small. And I immediately was like, I'm not qualified. I've never worked in a nonprofit. I've never run a museum. I don't have an art degree. I have a math degree. And he was like, that's okay. You've been around creative people. You know how to make something profitable. Even though we're a nonprofit, we have to do a lot of fundraising. You know how to package a story and sell it. And all of those skills are things this new museum would require. And so I went and interviewed with the board, and I took the job and started in January. I mean, and so I have to kind of go back when you ask that question to be like, the journey started 2 years before I left, but I really put time and thought, but it still ended up in a completely different place than anything I would have planned for.
Wow. That is epic. And such another, I don't talk about this a lot with my clients unless they're also into it, but I do believe strongly in the universe and delivering the right thing in the right time for us. Have you always been like that? Or was that kind of also a new revelation?
I've been a spiritual person since high school, but I think I've probably always believed a little bit in karma,
Yeah.
but I've never been I'm not so in love with the idea of love per se that I would just randomly walk through life. I do believe like you reap what you sow, and
Yeah.
an open mind leads to kind of an open life. And so I feel like you have to put yourself out there, and you have to kind of curate your life in order to receive things that are meant to come your way. But there have been times born out of both good times and bad times where maybe in the middle of something I'm thinking, I don't know why I'm going through this. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know, this feels like really heavy or really difficult or really inspiring, and I don't know what I did to deserve this, good or bad. And then later, years later, I might go through something that I'm like, oh, that puts that in context.
Yeah.
That now I can look back 5 years later and be like, for example, when I got divorced, it was really painful and challenging and difficult, and I couldn't figure out like why per se. And then years later, when I was asked to go back to Martin during 2017, which is the year of Me Too, and Martin had kind of a regime change, and there were a lot of angry women, and all of a sudden I thought, I know how to take the anger of women seriously because I had been that angry woman. And so years later, it kind of gave context to something that had happened years before that I couldn't rationalize at the time. I'm a little bit like a Nancy Drew. She was one of my favorite icons. I love mysteries, but I love really figuring things out, puzzles, which is why I went into planning, I think, in some ways. So it's hard for me to live in an in-between sometimes. I like to name things and solve them and then kind of move on and learn from them or whatnot. And so sometimes knowing that there's a gap of years between an insight and a revelation can sometimes be hard. But I do believe that whether it's karma, whether it's fate, whether it's serendipity, whether it's the universe, whether it's God or some kind of power, I do believe there is something larger.
Yeah.
At work.
Yes. Oh, this is awesome. Okay. I don't even know where to go next. So clearly you found your purpose. Purpose and identity are the two big things that often people struggle with when they leave their main career. Talk a little bit about identity. Like, was that a struggle at all? I mean, I assume you had closely identified as being the CEO in the advertising world for many years and then stepping away from that. Was that something that you were thinking about
It was
at all?
actually not hard at all. I never aspired to be a CEO, honestly. And so the day I got the job as CEO, I stood up and actually told the staff I wouldn't keep the job for more than 5 years. And when I came off and out of that moment, the head of talent and culture was like, you shouldn't, she's like, you shouldn't have said that. That's going to make people really nervous. And I was like, yeah, but it's truthful. And I believe that, when you're going through anything, I felt like during my tenure of CEO, there was Me Too, there was the pandemic, there was George Floyd. There were a number of things where the idea of truth and accountability were exceptionally important.
Yeah.
I don't want to think that you only need a crisis to make those character traits exceptionally important for leaders all the time, but I believe during those years they certainly were. And transparency. And so I responded by saying, I think it's more important that I'm truthful and transparent, that I have absolutely no aspirations to stay in this role. And I think part of that, honestly, is my upbringing and being in the military. Like, I've never wanted to live one place forever or do one job forever. And sometimes that was hard in my career because people would be like, why are you raising your hand for all these different things? Or why can't you just sit still? Or why can't you be patient? And I think sometimes it was misinterpreted as impatience. I think I am impatient, but I don't think that was always the reason why I was raising my hand. I think that, especially in advertising, a lot of people have ambidextrous skills. You might be a good salesperson and a good strategist, or a great storyteller and a good leader or whatnot. And so there would be a void And I think my dad, being a military person, always kind of trained us to run towards the void, to run towards the fire. And so I thought, we need this right now. I would look at my skill set and be like, I can do that. I don't have to do it forever, but I can do it for a period of time. I can do it for 1 to 3 years and then move on. So I don't think my identity has ever been caught up in my title. And I don't believe, I never aspired to run my own agency. I've never aspired to have my name on a door. I don't mind working for Mullen or Martin's name. And once, I think the reason I was effective at selling both of those agencies is I believed in them and I believed in the people who'd birthed them. And I didn't waver. I only worked at one other agency, or like 1.5 for a year here and there. But, you know, for 20 of my 30 years, I was at Martin. And for 10 of the 30 years, I was at Mullen. I was at Mullen 3 different times, first, middle, and end. And I think that I think I was effective in selling them because I believed in them. And I think I was loyal to them because I believed in them. And when I decided to come to the close of my advertising career, I wouldn't have gone to another agency. If I was going to stay in the agency business, I was going to stay at one of those two because I believed in their story. And no amount of money was going to convince me to go pop over to another holding company or anything like that. It just wasn't worth it.
Yeah. So your agencies were known for bold creativity and equity and inclusion, strong in both of those areas. How are you weaving those same values into culture and programming at the museum?
At the branch?
Yeah.
I way smaller staff. So I was like 5,500 people to managing 8. So it's incredibly different, and we're open. The building's open 7 days a week, so we all have to work on and off 5 to 6 days a week, and a lot. And everyone who's in it is in it for passion because the salaries are not remotely like what they are in advertising. So
Right.
Which I know no one in advertising thinks they're paid fairly because we all work so hard, but I would say come spend a little time in the world and you will be far more appreciative. So I would say I'm on my way. There were some people that chose to leave when I came in because I'm a different kind of leader, and there are some choices that I've made since, and I'm very conscious when I'm filling roles that I'm being more diverse in my choices. I've as a proponent of equity and inclusion and diversity, I think sometimes that can be seen as I'm pro-female in the sense that like the future is female, but I actually don't subscribe to that point of view. I think homogenous teams make mistakes. They have blinders on, whether they're 9 women or 9 men, 9 white versus 9 brown. It's 9 straight versus 9 gay. The blinders is the homogeny, and the diversity is making sure that you have a team that allows you to see multiple sides of an issue so that you are less likely to be blind to something or unconscious of something or biased to something without knowing, to unconsciously knowing. And so I'm very intentional right now. I hate to use that word because it feels such a loaded word, but I am trying to be very thoughtful about making sure that I have a broader team. And ironically, for right now, that means hiring men, because the profit world tends to be stacked with a lot of women. And so I'm being, it's funny. I'm the exact opposite of like what I was doing in advertising. So
anything in terms of programming that's more focused on equity in terms of who your artists you're championing, or tell me a little bit about like what sorts of
in fact, I actually just sent
displays
these
you
numbers might not be exactly right, but I was sending a note to somebody the other day that we know our slate of curators and artists for the year. You normally have to plan 6 months to a year in advance. My programming didn't really start till next month, July. I would one exhibit that's up now, but everything prior to this was planned by my predecessor because it takes time to curate an exhibit. And so, but by the time we get to the end of the year, we will have had one Vietnamese artist, 20 Black artists, um, uh, 2 white men, 4 female curators. So I am being very thoughtful about how we show up and represent. We chose to have 2 Juneteenth exhibits, which a lot of other museums did not, as you, I'm sure, hear all the time. But, like the Smithsonian, the National Portrait Gallery, they've been under attack a lot. Leaders stepping down. UVA just had a leader step down. Of course, Harvard's under attack. So I think there's a lot of educational places that are feeling pressure to pull back from DEI, or if they stay in it and fight, they're under a lot of assault for that. And you might think that's odd as a museum to bundle yourself up with education, but the majority of Americans, 89% of Americans, believe that the work that comes out of a museum, of museums, art is truthful. And that is higher right now than government, church, NGOs, corporations, any other industry. That people believe that museums are truth tellers. And so I think that I am still being an activist in my choice of leading a museum, and the stories we choose to tell and what we don't choose to tell, and the people that we uphold are very conscious choices. And there was one government organization called the Institute of Museums and Library Services that was doged. I use it as a verb earlier this year. And so there are no more federal grants, or very, very few federal grants that come down. So we have to find ways to support ourselves financially through largely now private donors, or I'm turning to brands. Being a design museum, I think what we can offer, brands will go to the Super Bowl or South by Southwest or Cannes and spend $1 million for 5 days to be one of many in a spot, and then spend enormous amounts of money to differentiate themselves when they are one of many in a confined space, whether that confined space is CES or a series of blocks at Cannes or, a fashion week in New York City. For a tenth of that, they can do a beautifully curated exhibit that's brand enhancing in our museum for 8 weeks. So some people might say, yeah, but you're not going to get the foot traffic in your museum that you might in Times Square or Wall Street. But I would also say, how many people really went to Wall Street to see Fearless Girl versus how many people saw Fearless Girl statue through some form of social media or PR? Because you can take that installation and you can shoot video and stills and you can get PR and you can get journalists to cover it. And you can, again, it's brand enhancing and well curated. It's like a micro experiential moment that I think this industry does very well. But not always are those moments that brands show up brand enhancing or truly differentiated. And I think if you choose to do a museum exhibit, you have a chance to tell a whole different brand narrative. And so the next exhibit we have after this one is actually motorcycles and scooters. And we have a Classified Moto as the motorcycle brand that we're talking to that's going to curate one of the galleries. And John Ryland, the curator, does these incredibly beautiful kind of post-apocalyptic bikes and did all the bikes for Walking Dead, and they're stunning. And then on the other gallery is Vespa. Totally different form of design, but powerful and iconic in its own way. And then I've brought them together in this building that's on the historic registry and the historic, landmark. And it's got beautiful plaster ceilings built in 1919 with glass paned windows and beautiful hardwood floors and huge chandeliers. And then these motorcycles are going to be lined down the long gallery like armor in an old castle. And I cannot wait to see the imagery. And so then thinking about the next one and the next one and reaching out to brands and being like, this might be a way that you could have an experience like that, and just invite them to think differently. So that part has been challenging, but also brings back my marketing brain.
Absolutely. I was just thinking like how this is so perfect. Like you have found the exact spot you're supposed to be in the world because
Or
you're able to.
created it.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, essentially, created it because now you can use all of your past experience in bringing a new way at a time that is so important in this country to find other sources of funding for the arts. Like,
Yes.
brilliant.
And to bring visibility to artists who I think work warrants it and deserves it.
Yeah.
And whether that be like the 2 exhibits we have right now that we opened on Juneteenth, a lot of other museums didn't do that. They thought it was maybe risky.
Yep.
Did it. We had an enormous opening. It was phenomenal. The exhibits are thought-provoking and beautiful. One is on reframing protest using street art and graffiti as a way of creating healing and how that is a form of art and design in its own right. And it was 5 years from George Floyd, and our museum's on Monument Avenue, which is one of the famous avenues where there were Civil War monuments that were pulled down, including one right outside our front door. And so those protests happened on our street. We're the only museum on that street, and we have a voice, I think, in what happens next. And then the other exhibit is kind of a lovely byproduct, I think, of what all that work had done and created, was that it gave voice to a lot of people that didn't have voices before. And so the other exhibit's called Echoes of Us, and it's 16 different Black artists. And the point of that exhibit is to show that being a Black artist is not monolithic. It can mean lots of things. And so it's photography and quilting and painting and graffiti and street art and sculpture. And it's almost like one side fought for the right for the other side to, or one gallery kind of fought for the right for the other gallery to see its work come to fruition in some ways. And our foot traffic is double what we had the last exhibit. And so I think there's a place for it, and I think people are coming and they want to be a part of it, and they want to wrestle with what does this mean today, and they don't want to avoid the tough conversations, but it's not always couched in politics.
Yeah.
I think it's couched in real life.
Yeah. So I think you've kind of answered my last question for you, but if you want to expand upon it, looking ahead, what legacy do you hope your tenure at the branch will leave, thinking about your personal legacy now, both for the institution and for design as a force in society?
Oh my gosh. You know what? I hate to say that I haven't even thought of my legacy. It's only been 6 months. I'm just figure out how to run a museum, having never done this before.
I'll have you back in 5 years.
Pray to God that I don't fail at it, because I don't like to fail. And I've been pouring so much of my heart and soul into it to try to get wind in our sails that I haven't even thought about.
Yeah.
And I would like to see the museum still be here. But I would like to see us survive this administration. I would like to see we're Virginia's only design museum, but I'd like us to be one of the top 3 most talked about design museums in the country. I want it to be a destination for people to come to this state. I would love people to see that design is all around, that creativity is all around, whether it's your phone or your Warby Parkers or your necktie or your, laptop or your Dyson blow dryer or this amazing textile sculpturist who we have coming in 4th quarter, who takes silk and dyes strips of silk and paint and then sews them onto tapestries and does deconstructed paintings. I mean, when you train, it's kind of like, how Oprah used to do the thing about gratitude journals. And she said, if you write down something every day that you're grateful for, all of a sudden you will find you are a more grateful person because you're training your brain to look for positive things.
Yeah.
I feel like this chapter of my life, I am training my brain to see art and creativity everywhere. I know that my last 30 years it was there, but I always couched it more in a business context. I was looking for art and creativity to solve business problems. Now I'm looking for creativity, design, and art to inspire and help think differently. And I see it everywhere. And it has made me a more hopeful person. It has made me, I think, a more glass half full person. And I think it has made me a more optimistic person.
Kristen, this has been such an inspiring interview for me personally. I know my listeners are also going to love it. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you found me. Thank you for asking me to do this. It was a treat for me as well.
Thanks.
This podcast is sponsored by Good Morning Freedom, my consulting practice. I help executives, professionals, and business owners plan the non-financial part of their third act, like how to discover new purpose and how you want to spend your time. I offer a one-on-one third act blueprint package where we work together to discover some new avenues for exploration in your next chapter. My work with you is completely custom and will provide you with a ton of resources and support as you transition to this new stage of life. Don't miss the opportunity to intentionally design the rest of your life. For all the details, please go to goodmorningfreedom.com.